Hi everybody, this is Mrs. Kraus, and this is the video for Unit 2, Part 1 Notes on Atomic and Molecular Structure. I'm going to be bouncing back and forth between the PowerPoint and the text notes, and I'm going to go a little bit quickly, but you can always stop and replay the video if you need to. So let's get started. So we're going to start with the definition of an element. And that's going to be a pure substance that only has one type of atom. We do have 92 natural elements. However, there have also been additional elements that were synthesized by scientists, so those would be man-made. Some examples of natural elements are sodium, which is a metal, chlorine, which is a nonmetal, hydrogen, and lead. At this point, you should have filled in number 1 and number 2 in the notes. Okay. We're going to define an atom as the most basic unit of matter. Later in our class, we're going to talk about cells as the basic unit of life, but atoms are smaller than cells. In fact, it goes atom, molecule, and then cell. So, atoms are going to be the smallest particle of an element, like sodium or chlorine, that has all the properties of that element. At that point, we have done number 3 in the notes. Something that I find interesting is if you put 100 million atoms side by side, they would make a row only about 1 centimeter long. 100 million, that's quite a lot. So they are very, very tiny. We've also found that atoms have even smaller particles called subatomic particles. And that makes sense because sub means below. So that would be below the atom or smaller than the atom. Now there are 3 types of subatomic particles: protons, neutrons, and electrons, and we're going to talk about properties of each. Now we have 4 atoms shown in the picture here of different element types like hydrogen and helium, and in the pictures, protons are shown in red, neutrons are shown in blue, and electrons are shown in yellow. So, on our notes, we've answered number 4, 3 types of subatomic particles, and we've listed the 3 types in number 5. We're going to go on to number 6, where we look at the definition of each subatomic particle. So, protons, and by the way, the ways that we're going to compare the 3 subatomic particles are their charge and also where they're located within the atom. So we'll start with protons. Protons have a positive charge, and you can see them right here in the picture. And they're also found in the nucleus of the atom. The nucleus is the center of the atom right here. So we're going to fill in that definition for protons into the chart under number 6. Neutrons have a neutral charge, which means they have no charge at all. So sometimes we'll use a 0 to represent their charge. And they are also found in the nucleus. So your neutrons are shown in purple here at the center of the atom. Electrons have a negative charge, and they're found floating in a cloud that surrounds the nucleus. So at this point, we should have filled in the definitions for protons, neutrons, and electrons for number 6. Now, we can have atoms of the same element that have a different number of neutrons. For example, we have 3 forms of carbon: carbon 12, carbon 13, and carbon 14. And these are all carbon, so they're the same element, but they have different numbers of neutrons. When an atom when atoms of the same element have different numbers of neutrons, they're called isotopes of that element. Okay. Now, for carbon, we know that carbon always has 6 protons. That's what defines it as an atom of carbon specifically. So the number of protons is not going to change, but the number of neutrons will change. So here they're comparing carbon-12 and carbon-14. Carbon-12 has 6 protons, but it also has 6 neutrons. That's why it's called carbon-12. Okay, we add the protons and neutrons together to get carbon-12. Carbon-14, which is another isotope of carbon, has 6 protons. That's what makes it carbon, but it has 8 neutrons. So if we add 6 and 8, that makes carbon-14. So these two are different isotopes of the same element, carbon. So we are going to fill in the definition of an isotope for number 7, and the example we gave was carbon-12 and carbon-14. You may want to explain that carbon-12 has 6 neutrons, carbon-14 has 8 neutrons, and they both have 6 protons. When we add the protons and neutrons together, we're going to get the numbers 12 and 14. That's called the atomic mass, which we'll talk about in just a minute. Now, within an atom, all of the mass of that atom is held in the center, the nucleus of the atom. That's because electrons, which are the only thing that's outside the nucleus, have a tiny, tiny mass, so we don't even consider their mass. We determine the mass of an atom by adding the number of protons and the number of neutrons, because that's what's in the nucleus of the atom. For example, we have carbon-12 here, and this is kind of what you would see on a periodic table. This would be the symbol for carbon. 6 refers to the number of protons, which is what makes it carbon. And 12 is going to be the atomic mass. So we've taken 6, the number of protons, and added it to the number of neutrons, which in this case is 6, and we've gotten the atomic mass, 12. Right. For number 8, we said all of the mass of an atom is in the nucleus, and we can calculate it by adding the number of protons and neutrons. The example we gave was carbon-12, and you might actually want to write out this little chemical symbol and indicate to yourself that 6 is the number of protons and 12 is the atomic mass. And for right below it where it says protons plus neutrons, what we're looking for is atomic mass. Now again, we can find the number of protons by looking at this little number up here. It's the smaller number when you look at the chemical symbol. So sometimes they'll have the smaller number on the top, and sometimes the smaller number will be on the bottom. Either way, the smaller number is the atomic number, the number of protons in that atom. So again, atomic number is just a way to say the number of protons. And that's what defines this as carbon. So the example we gave was again carbon. And we're going to specifically say that 6 is the atomic number, which is the number of protons. So we can go ahead and fill that in here for number 10. Okay, for number 11, how do I find the number of neutrons? Well, if I know that I have 6 protons and I have an atomic mass of 12, which is protons plus neutrons, I can simply take that atomic mass and subtract the atomic number, the number of protons, to get the number of neutrons. Okay? So atomic mass minus atomic number is the number of neutrons. Please go ahead and fill in this information to number 11. Now we're going to talk about how atoms can be combined to create compounds, which are several atoms that are joined together. Now, we technically define a compound as a substance formed from the chemical combination of two or more elements in definite proportions. What that means is, let's say we're talking about water, which is a compound. For water, H2O, we always have 2 hydrogens for every 1 oxygen. We can't change that. We can't have 1 hydrogen and 2 oxygens because it would be a completely different compound with completely different properties. And this right here is a glucose molecule. It has 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens, and 6 oxygens. And if we change that, let's say we did 12 carbons, 6 hydrogens, 6 oxygens, it would be a totally different compound with totally different properties. So, for number 12, we're going to fill in always formed from a specific combination of atoms and always formed in a definite proportion. The examples we gave were water, and water has the chemical formula H2O. We're going to want to make this 2 a subscript, so a little bit below the H and smaller. And then our other example was glucose, which is a sugar, and its chemical formula is C6H12O6. And again, I'm making those numbers a little bit smaller and below each of the letters. And here we have them again right here. So we've got water and glucose, or sugar, which we already talked about. We also have table salt, which is a combination of 1 sodium atom and 1 chlorine. And we have carbon dioxide, which is 1 carbon and 2 oxygens. Some properties that compounds have is they are chemically and they are physically different from the elements that they're made up of. For example, water, which is H2O, is going to have different properties from hydrogen or oxygen. If we find hydrogen by itself, it usually exists as 2 hydrogens stuck together, and it's a gas. Same with oxygen. When it's by itself, it's 2 oxygens stuck together, and it's a gas. But when we create water from hydrogen and oxygen, water is a liquid at room temperature. So it has different properties from both hydrogen and oxygen. So you're going to fill in chemically and physically for number 13 and give our example of hydrogen gas, oxygen gas, and water as a liquid. Now, within a compound, the atoms have to be held together by something so they don't break apart. We say that those atoms are held together by something called a chemical bond. Chemical bonds are created between electrons of 2 different atoms. So here we're showing oxygen bonding to hydrogen, and you can see that the bond or the connection between the 2 of them involves these little blue dots, which are electrons. The electrons that are able to participate in these chemical bonds are called valence electrons, and those are the ones that are located farthest out from the nucleus of the atom. So here we see with oxygen that we have these 2 electrons close to the oxygen nucleus, but we have several further out that are able to participate in chemical bonds, and those are called our valence electrons. In our next video for this lecture, we're going to talk about different types of chemical bonds. But before I forget, make sure that you fill in number 14 with valence electrons. Thank you.